Hey garden nerds, I'm Christy Wilhelmi. Today I want to address another question that has come across my desk a number of times, and that is, what's the difference between compost and fertilizer? So let's break it down. First up, a refresher on compost, because I did another video on the difference between compost and mulch, which you can check out. That really goes into depth about what compost is. When it comes to fertilizer, some people do use compost as a fertilizer, but the truth is compost is kind of a low-level nitrogen fertilizer. It doesn't have a whole lot of nutrients in it. It is mostly soil biology if it's healthy compost. If it's been baking out in the sun, pretty much all the microbes are dead, but if it's healthy and it's been kept, in moist and in a shady spot, it's going to be viable, and that's pretty much going to inoculate your soil when you apply it with beneficial microbes and undecomposed organic matter, whatever remains in the compost, to help increase porosity and airflow through the soil. So that is what compost does. It also has a few other things going on for it, but I want to focus on fertilizer today so that you know the difference between the two. First off, let's talk about those numbers on the box. So I have here a box of fertilizer. This is for veggie gardens, and you'll see these three numbers, 4, 4, 4. Now on some things like blends for fruit trees, for example, you'll see 6, 2, 4. What do these numbers mean? Well, this is always in the same order, and it always means the same thing. The first number represents nitrogen, the second number represents phosphorus, and the third number represents potassium. So those numbers on the periodic table are N, P, and K, and the K throws people off because it's potassium. Anyway, these numbers represent the percentage of each of those elements in relationship to the other elements in here and on the box. So most of the time in synthetic fertilizers, you're going to pick up the box and the numbers on the back will be quite high. It'll be, 10, 20, 30, up there. These synthetic nutrients are synthesized usually through what's called the Haber-Bosch process, or the Haber-Bosch process. You can look that up. I'm not going to go into it here. But basically, that is how synthetic nitrates are created. But when you read the back of the box, it's all going to be derived from chemical signatures. So that's not something that I encourage people to use. I'd rather you pick up a box of fertilizer that is OMRI certified or USDA organic certified or CCOF certified. These are all institutions that label something as being safe for use in organic agriculture. On the back of a box of organic fertilizer, you will see things you actually recognize, like blood meal, bone meal, feather meal, calcium carbonate, which is, that's pretty straightforward, it's calcium. Langbonite, these are mined minerals. Alfalfa meal, kelp meal, and potassium sulfate. Now, let's pause and talk about what each of these numbers do. So, nitrogen. Nitrogen is responsible for green leafy growth. That's my little hand signal when I teach the class so that people can physically anchor what nitrogen does. Phosphorus and potassium, they work together, and depending on which country you live in, you'll see them attributed to different things. Here in the US, you'll see that phosphorus is attributed to root development. But if you look over across the ocean in the UK, it's also attributed to fruiting and flowering, which is important because if you're growing anything in your vegetable garden that makes a fruit, that phosphorus is going to be one of the most important things. The third number on the box is potassium, and potassium is responsible for overall vigor as well as fruiting and flowering. You can use this information to diagnose what's going on with your plants and what maybe your soil needs. These nutrients, of course, I call the big three. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those are the big three. But there are also usually some minerals in the mix as well that naturally come from some of the other ingredients. The thing you need to know is that it's really important to take a soil test before you apply any kind of fertilizer to your garden. Simple soil tests that test nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and soil pH are available online or at your local nursery. It takes a few minutes to take a soil sample, let the soil, you put it in water, let the soil settle overnight. If you have clay soil, it can happen really quickly. If you have sandy soil, it can take longer. And then you draw off some water, you put it in a little pipette, in a pipette, and you drip it into the test kit, put in the capsules, shake it up, set it on the counter. Really fun to do with kids, by the way. I'm not a kid, I don't have any kids, but really fun to do if you are a kid or feel like a kid on the inside. Anyway, take the soil test, see what's lacking, and then amend based on that. Really important not to over-fertilize because that can cause imbalances in the soil, it can send microbes packing, it can kill off some others. But generally speaking, synthetic fertilizers can cause problems in soils and end up in the water table, which causes algae blooms out in the ocean because nitrates, remember, nitrates create green leafy growth. That includes algae, and that algae steals oxygen from the fish, and then we create these dead zones out there. So the lower levels of nutrients that you find in organic fertilizers are better suited to gardening because it's actually more at a level that the plant can absorb, and the less of it washes away. Now I want to address something for a minute, for those of you who've been following me for a while. It is the belief of the people I have learned from, particularly Dr. Elaine Ingham, that every soil has exactly what it needs to grow without the need for any fertilizers. And that is most likely true. I have found with my sandy soil, I have to add a little bit of something because the soils, even with high biology in the soil, the nutrients just flush out really quickly. So I add just a pinch of fertilizer in the bottom of the planting hole of my heavy feeder crops like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant. I put a little bit at the bottom of these kale plants here. They don't need much, but I just wanted to give them a little something something. The best thing you can do is amend your soil with really good compost and worm castings, of course, because they have a lot of low-level nutrients that boost compost even more and make nutrients available to plants because the microbes consume those low-level minerals that worm castings provide. Also, it's important to distinguish the difference between compost and fertilizer in this way. Compost is something that is usually fabricated from animal manures and biomass, browns and greens. But fertilizer is usually processed from animal byproducts, meaning blood, bone, feather, and other things like cottonseed meal, alfalfa meal, soybean meal, and that kind of stuff, with a few minerals thrown in there for good measure. You can also make compost yourself, whereas fertilizer you would need to buy the components and mix your own blend. I try to avoid using fertilizers as much as possible, but sometimes you just need it. So use it with caution, use it after testing, and make sure it's what your soil and plants need. So take this information out into your garden and put it to good use. If you like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll find out when our next video comes online. Consider becoming a Patreon subscriber to support all the free stuff that we do here at Gardenerd. And of course, you'll find tons of information like this in my books, Gardening for Geeks and Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden. Happy gardening.